Good evening. Let's try that again. Good evening. Thank you. Welcome to the Shoals Marine Laboratories weekly science seminar. I am Sarah Morris, the John M. Kingsbury Executive Director of the Shoals Marine Lab, and I want to thank everybody for joining us for this evening's seminar. This is the third Rock Talk in our 2026 season. For those of you that are new to our community or who are joining us online, the Shoals Marine Lab is the oldest and largest marine laboratory in the country that is focused on undergraduate education, both in terms of coursework and in terms of research. The lab is operated jointly by the University of New Hampshire and Cornell University. Our seminars are affectionately known as Rock Talks because in the early days of the labs, before buildings that had walls and windows, our lectures often literally happened out on the rocks. Even though now we have returned or we've moved into covered spaces, we still like to think back to those early days at the lab. We really use these opportunities to explore different aspects of science and science education, generally related to the marine environment. And we are really looking forward to this evening's talk. In addition to the guests that are joining us online, we have 3 classes with us on the island at this time: marine mammal biology, marine invasive species, and sustainable fisheries. In addition, this is the first week of our 10-week research interns in the Shoals Undergraduate Research Group, affectionately known as SURGES, who will be on the island for the entire summer. The format for tonight's talk is a 45-minute talk followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. For our friends online, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will read your questions out loud. For those of you in the audience, I will be coming around with the microphone so that our friends online will be able to hear the question in addition to the answer. Tonight's speaker is Dr. John Hare. John is the Science and Research Director of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. He oversees science related to the NOAA Fisheries mission in the Northeast region, including marine fisheries, protected species, aquaculture, habitat, and ecosystem science. John earned his BA degree from Wesleyan University and his PhD in oceanography from SUNY Stony Brook. He received a National Research Council Research Associate position in 1994 to work at the NOAA Beaufort Laboratory and was hired by NOAA in 1997. John moved to the NOAA Narragansett Laboratory in 2005. He was appointed Oceanography Branch Chief in 2008 and Lab Director in 2012. He started as the Northeast Fisheries Science Center Director in 2016 and now is located at NOAA Woods Hole Laboratory. His research is focused on fisheries oceanography, understanding the interactions between the ocean environment and fisheries population, with an aim of contributing to assessments and management. John also examines the effect of climate change on fish and invertebrate population dynamics. This work involves coupling the output of global climate models with population models to simulate the effects of climate change on population dynamics. He also works to move the new scientific information into assessment and management process and the development of new technologies for observing ocean ecosystems. This evening, he will be presenting using an incremental approach for wicked problems in the marine resource management. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John Hare.
We're looking forward to that. I hope so. Thank you all very much for joining. I've given this talk a couple of times, and no one likes to solve a problem. Everyone wants to solve a problem with a big splash, have it be a big revolution. But I'm going to try to convince you that working day by day, persistently, incrementally is the way to go. So that's my job. So this came from a food for thought that I wrote for the IC's Journal of Marine Science in 2020. And then I sort of rewrote it. Someone asked me to rewrite it for a skimmer, some kind of online sort of marine management type blog thing. So if you want more information, you can go to those, and I'll share this. I've already shared this presentation, so you can get the links from it, or just email me. My email is on the front page, john.hare@noaa.gov. Feel free to email me, I don't email you back, email me again. It's not that I don't want to reply, it's just sometimes I need to be reminded. So email me if you have any questions. So a food for thought article 2020, you can go back and read it if you want some more detail. So why did I write a food for thought article? I wanted to put out my perspective as I was transitioning from being a scientist, wholly scientist, to being more of a scientific administrator, what I like to call a federal bureaucrat. It's got such a nice ring to it. When somebody says that they're a federal bureaucrat, I'm proud to be so. So I was trying to make sense of my new job as a federal bureaucrat and my old job as a research scientist. And so I thought about it, wrote this food for thought for me, but I think there is also utility for all of us thinking about how to solve these difficult problems. So my perspective, Sarah talked about it a little bit. I went to college thinking I wanted to be a medical doctor. I was interested in science. The paths for scientists when I was entering college was, you're interested in science, you like biology, pre-med was the path. I didn't know there were other paths. I learned that I did not want to be a medical doctor. I didn't like the whole calling mentality of pre-med. So end of sophomore year, there I am. The one thing that I've learned after 2 years of college is I don't want to be a medical doctor. So then what did you do? And I wandered into an oceanography class. It was very interesting. Began thinking about ocean in my sort of biology building in Middletown, Connecticut. There was a thing that said Shoals Marine Lab. Think about a summer learning about marine science. Had a little card. We had postcards back then. You pull the postcard and you filled it out and you put a stamp on it and you mailed it to Shoals Marine Lab and it sent you a book of information back. And so I applied to come to Shoals Marine Lab, 2 courses. Field marine research, which I think was a 4-week course. Underwater research, which I'm almost positive was a 2-week course. And then I spent this, I don't remember how long summers were then, probably the same as now. So 4 to 6 weeks. My primary job is washing pots and pans. And then anytime they asked me to do anything else, I would gladly do it as best I could. They would ask me to do things other than wash pots and pans. I found myself washing pots and pans quite a bit. I learned a number of things. I learned that research and science was for me, that a career in marine science was possible because I was surrounded by people who had a career in marine science. This piece is important. I think it's good to think about. Community is important. Having a community of people that you work with and think that you can sort of trade ideas is very important. I learned that when I was here, but then I forgot. I spelled important wrong. That's what it is. And I also very much like working on the RV thing. When I was washing pots and pans, occasionally they would say, we need someone, mate on the Kingsbury, and I would jump at the opportunity. And I very much liked working on research vessels, doing whatever I could on there. It just gave me an opportunity to not wash pots. So I started graduate school in 1988. My choice in graduate school was because it was close to my then girlfriend, now wife. I still think it was a good choice. I chose a graduate school that had a marine science program and was close to my wife. Those were the 2 my girlfriend at the time. Those were my 2 criteria. And I lucked out. I worked with Bob Cowan. He recently retired from Oregon State University. I learned post hoc afterwards that your advisor is one of your most important decisions that you make as a scientist. And I got lucky. So one of the things I want everyone here who's sort of thinking of going into graduate school, think about who you want your advisor to be. There's a critical relationship to develop you as a scientist. You want someone who's going to support you, who's going to challenge you, but most of all, who's going to care about your career going forward. And I got that with Bob, and so I was very lucky. I did my dissertation work on the larval stages of bluefish and how ocean dynamics affected larval survival in the pretty specific topic. So when you sort of stop after that, okay, I've got my PhD, and you look at where I've been. 10 years effectively in the university setting. 4 years getting my BA at Wesleyan, summer here, Shoals Marine Laboratory, wonderful summer. 6 years in a PhD program. And at the time, I never would have said that I was in an ivory tower. But looking back on it, I was very much in an ivory tower. Everything was about learning, about research, sort of self-focused and contained. And yes, you thought about the outside world, but the outside world wasn't sort of front and center. So I was very much in an ivory tower for the first 10 years of my career. Then I went, as Sarah said, I went down to the Beaufort Laboratory, Beaufort, North Carolina. Started as a postdoc, so in sciences, typically get your PhD, you then get a postdoc, which is a temporary or 1, 2, 3 years position before you get something more permanent. So I started as a postdoc on a 1-year postdoc. It got renewed for a 2-year postdoc, got renewed for a 3-year postdoc. And I finally was hired as a research oceanographer at the NOAA Beaufort Laboratory. Again, working in fisheries oceanography. How does the ocean affect fish population? It's a pretty basic question. You don't see the connection to fisheries. Yeah. So Beaufort is a special place. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Beaufort, North Carolina. Is it a special place? Is it a special place? Special as Shoals? Almost. Okay. Good answer for the crowd. I learned how to work with people. In my dissertation, I worked with a relatively small group of people. I worked a lot at sea with people on ships and with a small group of scientists, but I got to Beaufort and really learned to work with people even more broadly, work on a number of different projects, lead projects, work on projects, contribute to projects. I grew professionally, started as a postdoc, then as a research scientist, and then a team lead, sort of in that sort of entering sort of management supervision. And I think one of the most important things I learned at Beaufort is leadership matters. I think Sarah was telling me about her experience coming from Buffalo to here. My experience in Beaufort for Hare was very similar. The leadership changed in the lab, and it was like, oh my God, leadership matters. Just the environment changed completely. Because I knew that I needed to look for a new job. I looked for a new job, and I found a new job in Narragansett, Rhode Island. So then I spent 10 years in Narragansett, Rhode Island. I'm still working fisheries oceanography, but the space between fisheries oceanography and climate and fisheries is like nothing. Fisheries oceanography, you can think about sort of shorter term processes affecting fish populations, and climate and fisheries is longer term processes affecting the population. So it was a very natural slide for me in terms of my career. So then the question becomes, how is a changing ocean affecting fish population? In that sort of early 2000 period, as we as a country, as sort of fisheries management, is how we think about marine ecosystems, we're getting to realize the challenge that climate change creates. So the managers in NOAA and the management council started coming to me and the group that I was working with and saying, how is climate change going to affect our management? So I like to think about it, and I had an opportunity to learn management by osmosis. I've never, in graduate school, I taken one fisheries management course. The course looks nothing like what I know fisheries management to be, so I was in that talent, but clearly. But I really learned how fisheries management worked on those early interactions, being asked questions by managers, providing answers to that, trying to understand where their questions are. So then, 2016, on that, not at a crossroads, it was a sort of crossroads self-created. Do I continue being a scientist, or the director of the Northeast Fisheries Science Center had opened, the previous director of the time? So continue being a scientist, continue working on climate change and fisheries, or do I apply for the director and think about working in fisheries and protected species, habitats and ecosystems, aquaculture, marine development, sort of the local, regional, national, international issues. And obviously I chose to apply for director and I was offered it, and I haven't looked back since. So becoming director was very much another change in direction. We were going from clearly a scientific position to an administrative position to a federal bureaucrat. I love science and I love research, and I equally love creating an environment where science and research. That's what I feel like I'm doing. Not a practicing scientist, but deputy director. I feel like to say that we're enabling. But we see ourselves as enabling people to do the best science. But I still came to this director position very much from a scientific perspective, an ivory tower sort of scientific culture perspective. And then we get into director of Northeast Fisheries Science Center. We have stock assessments, we have surveys. It's operational science. How many of you think that, you think of a weather forecast? Weather forecasts happen every 4 hours. That's an operational science. Fisheries science, NOAA, is an operational science. It just happens once a year. So it's it's like a hamster wheel. You do a survey, you collect data, you do a stock assessment, you provide advice to the council, you repeat. So just as director, I got into that wheel. We just started work in 2016, 2017, 2018. And then in 2018, everything stopped. There was a federal shutdown. It was the longest federal shutdown to date until our most recent federal shutdown, which was even longer. So in that federal shutdown, 2018, 2019, there was an enforced no work. No computer, couldn't use your work computer, couldn't do your work email, couldn't access any of your work documents. It was no work. So I thought of it, and I still like to think of it. In a sense, it was a sabbatical. It was an opportunity for me not to do my day job, and to have time to think about something else. And so it was in this period of my sabbatical, enforced federal shutdown sabbatical, where I really took the time to think about how do I apply what I know as a scientist to this new world that I'm in terms of providing scientific advice in fisheries. You go back and Northeast Fisheries Science Center vision statements. Who reads vision statements? Probably most people don't read vision statements, but they are very informative to know what an organization wants to do. And our vision is to conduct ecosystem-based research and assessments of living marine resources to promote the recovery and long-term sustainability of these resources and to generate social and economic opportunities and benefits for. So there's a lot of words in there, but think about what that distills down to. Our job is to provide science to improve management, to allow the harvest fisheries for the long, and to allow protected species, marine mammals, endangered species to recover in the long. So then you look, okay, so that's what our mission is. So the next step in my sort of reflection was to think about what are our legislative drivers. So, University of New Hampshire, Cornell University, they're universities, much of the science is basic science. One could say science for science. NOAA Fisheries is not that way. NOAA Fisheries is science applied to these four main laws. Law number one, Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Land Conservation Act, to ensure the long-term economic and biological sustainability of our nation's fisheries. Law number two, Endangered Species Act, protect and recover imperiled species and the ecosystems upon which they live. Law number three, Marine Mammal Protection Act, prevent marine mammal species and population stock from diminishing as a result of human activity. Law number four, National Aquaculture Act, promote and support the development of private aquaculture. So that's for NOAA Fisheries, that's our to-do list. We need to do science to do these things that we're legally required to do. So, okay, we have our mission, we have our to-do list. So we have science is one of the themes, sustainability is one of the themes, marine ecosystems and resources is one of the themes. This idea of social and economic opportunity is one of our themes. So how does this fit together? So I would argue, training as a scientist in my university setting, that no one ever called it this, but I would argue that we learn the rational, comprehensive approach to policy. And that is in the policy world, that's a way that policy can be formed, rational, comprehensive approach. That's the systematic decision-making and planning process that prioritizes objective. So what that means in the fisheries context is that fisheries management, that box over here on the right, has a problem. They pass it over to the scientists and they say, here's our problem, give us an answer. Scientists do their work. There's a little bit of a wall between them. They do their work. They pass the answer back, and it's the best answer available, best answer available. And this idea is sort of the questions that are being asked and the answers that are being given are separate. Using this sort of rational approach to provide answers to people who want. And that is an approach which developed during World War II, this idea of rational analysis to solve problems, to sort of set the next step. And this is how fisheries management has been done, how a lot of the things in our country have been done, since they started, since World War II. So then I think, okay, early in my career, I'm a scientist. I'm trying to isolate problems and address them deductively, try to get a problem to a place where you can actually set up a hypothesis to test all hypothesis and alternatives. You're really trying to narrow down a small part of the system, test that hypothesis, and then learn, move on to either a slightly larger part of the system or a slightly different. But in mid-career, everything is connected. There's no way in the fisheries world, in marine management, we're North Atlantic right whale recovery. There's no way to separate out a small little piece of it and use deductive reasoning. Sort of in the North Atlantic right whale lobster conundrum, you've got lobster fishing, you have climate change, you have fishing communities, you have whale, you have herring, which is lobster bait, and you have sand lance, which is a replacement of the ecosystem for lobster. So all these things are knotted together. And you can't pull one piece out to try to figure it out without understanding everything else that's going on. And during this period of reflection, 32 days of reading and thinking, it's the definition of a wicked problem. I didn't grow up in New England, but I spent a lot of time in New England. Spending a lot of time in New England, I could sort of really relate to this idea of a wicked problem, but it's actually a word that's used in the public policy literature. And it's wicked problems. The guys wrote about the dilemmas and general theory of planning, 1973. And they wrote about these problems, which are complex, that you can't separate out small pieces of it, solve that small piece and provide an answer back. You need to work holistically. So you think about these wicked problems. This article by DeFries in the Gender and Science is excellent, 2017. They said that there's two traps. You're looking at a wicked problem, you're trying to solve it. You have two traps. One trap is falsely assuming that there is one tame solution. I like to think of that as one solution to rule them all. Trap, it's not there. The other one is inaction from overwhelming complexity. God, this is so complicated. Let's just keep doing what we're doing and maybe we'll sort itself out. Those are the two traps that they identified in that article. I think, looking back, or reflecting back on systems that were working, we believe that those are traps. So then what do you do? Okay, so we have an understanding it's a wicked problem. You read through the public policy literature. How do you work to address a wicked problem? First is to recognize that science is just one perspective of the problem. It's not the perspective, it is one perspective. That's what those eyes are around this cloud. There's multiple perspectives to every problem. In fisheries problem, there's a scientific perspective, there's a management perspective, there's a fisheries perspective, there's a conservation perspective, there's multiple perspectives. And you need to think about all of those multiple perspectives and how they're seeing the problem. Second part is you need to work together. It's not a problem that managers have that they're asking scientists to solve. It's a problem that this group of stakeholders that understand and want to make progress in the problem agree to work together, and then work together to define the problem, to define the process to addressing the problem, and then look for the solution and outcome. Other thing to recognize is that problem field, the problem itself is always changing. It's never stable enough that you can nail it down and work on it for 20 years to solve it, because over time it's going to change. Why is it going to change? Climate's change. Why is it going to change? The economy's change. Price of diesel is going, raised by 50%. You're never going to have your problem there for 10, 15 years where you can work to solve it. You need to recognize that it's always going to be changing. And that in part that's where the power of continuing to work together is not solve the problem, but work on the problem. It becomes a way to sort of make that incremental approach to addressing the problem. This article by Turnbull is like thick. Okay, 4 days to get through it and sort of just really think about it. Fortunately, I had 4 days. I couldn't work, couldn't use my computer, couldn't do email, and so I had 4 days to get through it. So then I decided to, after realizing that I would just write 10 lessons. I'm not even sure if like David read this for 10 things is even a thing anymore. How many people even know that? Right? At least one person needs to read it. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, thank you, Mike. So, you make a list, 10 things that I need to do. And his lists were funny. This list is not. So, first is just accept that fisheries are a complex socio-ecological system. You can't separate people out. A lot of times people think about, okay, I've got an ecosystem here, and I've got my human communities or socioeconomics here, and it doesn't work. It probably never worked, going back hundreds of years. But it certainly doesn't work now because there's no part of this planet that is not affected by human activity. So you have to look at both of them together. Second lesson for myself was strengthen existing adaptive management processes and institutions. And this one's a little archaic. I'm going to take a minute to explain. Fisheries management, I talked about that hamster wheel. Surveys, data collection, assessment, advice, survey, data collection, assessment, advice, survey, data collection, assessment, advice. That's an iterative process. And if you turn it into a learning process, it then becomes an adaptive management. So how do we turn these operational science to management processes that we have into ways to learn each cycle you go around? So strengthen existing adaptive management process. Number 3 is encourage and engage participatory science. Co-learning in Northeast Fisheries Science Center, we call it cooperatives. So work with other stakeholders on the problem. And by doing so, your perspectives will get closer together. And that in and of itself helps you make progress. So think about engaging in participatory or cooperative research. Lesson 4, question inertia. All systems will move in the direction that they've been moving because they were moving that way in the past. That's called inertia. So think about where you are going, where your work is going, where your science is going, where your problem solving is going. Just question, is this the right direction? Are there things that need to change? Just like every once in a while, take a breath and say, is this where I want to go? Number 5, respect all perspective. This one is key. Everyone has experience in this marine ecosystem. And a scientist's experience and perspective is of no more value than a fisherman's experience and perspective is no more value than a manager's perspective and experience. And so you need to recognize that all perspectives have value and you need to respect all perspectives. This last one, this number 6, not last one, sorry, just emphasizes the point that fishers have tremendous knowledge about the system. It's not a scientific training knowledge, but it is a how do I catch fish to make money type knowledge. What do I know about this ecosystem to have my best opportunity to collect fish that I can continue my business? So they have tremendous knowledge and we need to recognize that. Number 7 is always consider the scale of the problem. This is also a little sort of abstract, but most problems are quite broad. So you need to really think about how large is this problem in reality. I keep coming back, and it's Heidi is the one who asked. They keep coming back to the North Atlantic right whale lobster problem. How large is that problem? Certainly Gulf of Maine, southern New England, off of New York, New Jersey, and about there, there's other things. What was that, Connecticut? Yeah, Connecticut. There's other problems down south. But so, okay, the scale of our right whale lobster problem is Canada to New Jersey. So that's the scale that we need. Some problems are smaller, some problems are bigger, but always just sort of understand the scale of your problem. We got 3 more, so we're almost to the end. Number 8, be open to changing your mind and adjusting your perspective. I think that this is hopefully something that all scientists can do and are trained to do. But in my experience, that's not the case. Many people will stick to a particular idea or a particular hypothesis, stick to it religiously. But we need to be open to look at a problem, new evidence comes in, you learn something new, you have to be open to adjusting your perspective and changing it. I believe that is how we should be trained as scientists. So maybe it's not a lesson for myself, just a reiteration for myself. Number 9, we're getting into the more academic part of the list. Read, listen, and discuss broadly. To solve these problems, we really need to think and have an understanding of all the ideas that are out there. Debate with different people, different perspectives. Reading is still a good thing, I think. There's still a lot people get out of the scientific literature, being in an environment like this to discuss ideas. Science is excellent. So just take advantage to read, listen, and discuss as much as you can. And then this last one, I'm still a firm believer of publishing as a scientist. Does a couple of things. One is it's scientists, number 6 in the step of science is communicate. So how else do you communicate science without publishing? The other thing is it lets you sort of, the scientific literature is very robust, and you can go back to 1834 and read a paper. So it's a way to put a marker in the scientific record saying, this is where I was, this is what I found, this is what I thought. And then you can move on from there, but you've got that paper to mark that point in time. So continue to think about publishing, communicating the results of scientific data. One thing, thinking about this talk now, I haven't been very good at it. The last paper I published was 2022, so it's a reminder to myself I need to think about it. So good reminder. So then thinking, okay, I got these lessons in 2019. I started applying this, and we, being Northeast Fisheries Science Center director, we get to work on a lot of very interesting projects. I've already talked about the North Atlantic right whale and lobster fishery issue. North Atlantic right whale, the vessel stripes, that's the other major source of mortality for North Atlantic right whale. So how do you reduce entanglement in the lobster fishery? How do you reduce vessel stripes from all of the vessels that are traveling? Those are some pretty big problems that we get for. Science to support fisheries management. In this region, fisheries management is contentious. A lot of that contention is around New England groundfish. New England groundfish, cod, haddock, those species that you think of when you think of New England as sort of a cultural historical area where fishing occurs. There's also recreational fisheries in the Mid-Atlantic. Recreational fisheries have been becoming more and more contentious for about the past 10 years. In the Gulf of Mexico, there has been so much contention that the states have sort of taken some of the ocean away from the federal government. So the federal government we managed to 3 miles, and the states have taken the ocean 12 miles. So they're saying, okay, we want to manage fisheries here in this 12-mile limit because we don't like how the federal government recreation. My goal as science director, the Northeast did not have that happen in the Northeast. My goal is to keep this issue, at a lower temperature, so New Jersey doesn't say, I want to take UFEC and take it away. So that's an interesting problem. And we also have marine development. How many of you have heard of offshore? So that's one source of marine development. How many of you have heard of deep sea mining? That's another form of marine development. How many of you have heard of marine carbon dioxide removal? Okay, so that's another form of marine development. All of those forms of marine development are going to happen in the ocean. All of those places in the ocean where that development is going to happen, there's already people fishing there. So how do we help reduce that conflict over ocean use? So it's marine development, marine fisheries, and marine ecosystems. Northeast, we've been sort of front and center for the offshore wind issue in this country. There are offshore wind energy developments now south of Cape Cod that have been built. Current administration is really trying to slow that development down, stop that development. So it's a very interesting, wicked problem to have the opportunity to develop. So then I'm just going to put a plug in for NOAA Fisheries. So I was sitting in this room in 1986, listening to a lecture like this, and I didn't know what NOAA Fisheries was. I'm not even sure if we talked about NOAA Fisheries in field marine research, underwater research, or not. So I'm going to put a selfless plug in for NOAA Fisheries. You can do pretty much any kind of science that you're interested in. Population ecology, marine biology, zoology, oceanography, ecosystem science, fisheries, natural resource economics, anthropology, public health. You can look at pretty much any kind of marine organism that you're interested in looking at. Fish, obviously, marine mammals, endangered species. What do fish and marine mammals eat? They eat zooplankton. What do zooplankton eat? They eat phytoplankton. So you get all the sort of ecosystem components. So there really is a need for people to be interested in working for NOAA Fisheries. And for me, it's been a great career and very rewarding. So I'm going to wrap up here. This idea of, the rational, comprehensive approach, learning that sort of just ad hoc and during my academic career, and then wicked problems as a different approach to policymaking. They're not new ideas. I just came upon them mid-career, mid to late career. So one of my purposes here is to present them to you so you can sort of think about how should policy be made from science that you might be doing now, or from science that you might be doing. Eleanor Orstrom, she was down this path and wrote substantially about this 80s, 90s, 2000s. It was an excellent resource to go to think more about the socio-ecological system. Then there is the Fries and the gender article that was in Science. Had a bit of a splash, and then just kind of, like a lot of things, people just move on to find the next splash. We're talking about wicked problems and ecosystem management, laying out the different traps of what a wicked problem are. And then I just want to thank everyone at NOAA for almost 30 years having the ability to work for the Northeast region for almost 20 years now. The work that we do is important. It really is at the intersection between science and society. I find it very rewarding, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you very much. And I'd like to say, I didn't talk much about seabirds. I don't think to talk much about seabirds. I did meet Brian and Grace on the way out here. This is one of a NOAA survey. That's one of our seabird observers. So we have seabird observers on NOAA surveys out there driving around. And they're up on the bridge counting birds while we're doing other work. So that's the seabird. Yeah. I got Marie. I can't remember what her last. She worked with a guy at CUNY. I can't remember his name, but I'll remember it eventually.
All right, it's time for the Q&A, and there is plenty of time. Raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone around to you. When you talk in the microphone, talk really close so that everybody can hear.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation, and I especially loved what you said about fisher people. I grew up in a fishing community, and their knowledge is not only extensive, but it's generational.
Right.
And I really, really appreciate you acknowledging that, because I think that gets lost on the science side of things sometimes.
Very much so.
I had a question about what advice do you have for students such as ourselves who might feel like in the face of all of these wicked problems that there are so many directions to go, so many things to study, and so many interesting things out there. How do we pare those down?
For you, sort of like the inaction from overwhelming complexity.
Sure.
No, I mean, again, I think try something. Don't let the complexity, cause you to think. Obviously, think about what you're going to do, but don't think about it forever. Take a beat, think about it, and then try something. And then, the science is does get pretty channelized. Decisions you make early in your career do affect decisions later in your career, so you do need to be thinking about that, but you can't be scared of that. I made two major changes in my career. One, I'm not going to be a doctor. And two, I'm a scientist. So there's always opportunities to change. Just got to work. I can try something. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you again. That was a phenomenal talk. So going back to, I forget what number on the list of 10 things it was, but question inertia. I read a book called The Service Berry by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which is about questioning our consumerist economy and our capitalist economy. And she introduced the idea of reciprocity economies and gift-giving economies on a local scale. as a way to not only build relationships, but also kind of be aware and thankful and appreciative of the things that we have and use, and look at things from perspective of abundance instead of limits. And I was wondering, do you have any thoughts on like specific elements of inertia that you have seen that maybe we as a community or we as early career scientists could look at and question and challenge in our own lives?
Specific, I'd like that. Give a good answer. Let me think for a moment. So where have I really questioned inertia? So I think one place, again, it's a little, I'm gonna take it's a little bit detailed, so I'm gonna explain it. Spend a little bit of time. So stock assessment models, they sort of had, they inherently assumed that the systems that they were assessing were variable but not changing. And then, climate change comes along, and it seems pretty clear, even in the word, that you can no longer assume that your system's not changing. But that is a change in sort of how stock assessment is still unfolding, because there's so much inertia behind the traditional approach to stock assessment. So that's where, you have, my opinion is you have to work and implement it. Just persistently stay at, keep pushing the direction that we're trying to get it to go. Another example of inertia, it's more just sort of like organizational inertia. How many organizations do you know that they just redo what they did the year before? And then the same outcome. You've seen that a number of times in NOAA itself. We used to have these leadership classes. We used to have these leadership classes, and they'd call us down, and they would tell us how to fill out this form and how to file this form. And you would keep going to these leadership classes, and they're not telling us how to lead. They're telling us how to follow. So then trying to help people understand the leadership is not following, but that's inertia, because why do you do this thing? Well, that's what we did last time. Why did you do it last time? Well, that's what we did the year before. So really trying to be thoughtful about what they're doing in that step. Those are two examples are not really good. So I hope I got it a little bit. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, I thought it was a great presentation. I really liked the idea of incorporating sustainability and fisheries through an intersectional lens. And I was curious, I know we were talking about fishermen, the fishermen community earlier, if you had any specific strategies or advice on how to incorporate them and community members into research and science being done, since a lot of times the scientific community can feel a little isolated to those who aren't.
Yeah, so I think, Northeast with their science, we have a very strong property research program. They're expanding their portfolio over a number of years, and they're trying to work with specific fisheries more and more. The on-demand gear development is another excellent example. So the whales are getting entangled in lobster pots. One of the potential solutions is to have the lobster pot buoy only come to the surface, and the lobster wants to retrieve it. It's called on-demand gear. Heidi's working with that group. They're working with, how many fishermen are working from 40, 50, 75. So just working directly with fishermen to learn how to do this together. Those are two excellent. And then aquaculture has always been our aquaculture lab in Milford, Connecticut is constantly working with the aquaculture to learn what they are having challenges with and developing solutions to work with them. One is probiotic, which actually increases the survival of the oyster larvae and spat. So just continuing to work with that. I think that would be my
Thank you so much. I noticed you talked about kind of pitching NOAA as a career to these young scientists. And I think for a long time, federal roles felt really secure, like a safe option if you could land one.
And I'm wondering what advice you have to this group of people who maybe now see federal roles as more insecure with federal funding cuts and huge job cuts, and what you would say to them if they're interested in a career at NOAA.
And again, going back to your plan, right? Buy it. Always change careers if you want to. What we went through last year was tough. Firing and retiring. So yeah, it's not as secure as it once was, but still a good place to work. The problems are still challenging. Still a good group of people. I think, on the academic side, some of those same problems are there. They're hitting sort of their funding challenges 12 months later. Just takes longer to get through the pipeline. So I think, being a scientist is different than what it was. It's more not as secure, but still an extraordinary, exciting way to spend a life, have a career. So from my perspective, if you're interested in science, continue to pursue it and try things and figure out what you like. But yeah, it is always a different place now.
This wonderful speech, and I'm especially excited of this idea of how like fishery management is sort of like collaborations of many parties. And building upon that, in one of the diagrams, you kind of feature like these boxes of what's more about the science and this constant communication with a larger box of management. So I was wondering, like, based on your understanding of this field, like how effective is that communication between those two parties, and specifically like, when a finding or advice made by the scientific community, how effective and quickly are those knowledge being transferred to the management and making changes in it?
Yeah, so I think a lot of scientists want to work in that figure where managers have a problem, they pass them the problem, they work on their solution and they pass it back. And then they get mad when managers don't use it. And they sort of go, why aren't you using my science? And it's because it's not that simple. It's not a transactional science, particularly with these difficult problems. It's not transactional. It needs to be relational. And then the other part is many scientists do work what they think is appropriate for fisheries management, but they never take the time to go communicate that to management. So it gets into that wicked problem kind of frame. It's working together on a problem over time is how to get science into it. It's not throwing something down on a table and saying, here's my science, use it, and then going, and then working on something. It needs to be much more relational, not that sort of separate role. I don't know if that makes sense.
I just want to add that all of the field ornithology scientific communication posters are still up from last week. And I think what John is saying, if I'm not misreading things, is you're communicating differently scientist to scientist
Correct.
than you are if you're talking with other group of people,
100%.
and learning how to make those different kinds of communications are a key part of the scientist educational process. So really think about that. Do what?
Lesson number 11.
Add it in.
Yeah, add it.
Just put a little
Put it in.
asterisk.
Communicate differently to different audience. Communicate what you think the audience is interested in hearing. In this case, it was what I was interested in. With that lesson. But when you're working with people, it's always good to think about what do they want to hear from you, not what do you want to know.
Does anyone else have additional questions? I actually wanted to ask one, because you've done something that a lot of other people haven't done, and that is you kind of stayed with NOAA for a key part of your career, but you still ended up having to move around. And you started off sharing that your choice of grad school was based on your girlfriend, now your wife.
Correct.
And so can you talk a little bit about how, yes, about choices, because it's a very different thing at our stage of career
100%.
to think about that, but it's something that I think many people don't ever get a chance to hear.
Yeah. So I think from my perspective, kind of going back to your generate options yourself. Because it's much better to have a choice of three things, from my perspective, much better of a choice of three things. There's a choice of one thing than a choice. So from graduate school, the next step, yeah, I effectively had three choices. One was a postdoc at the NOAA lab in Beaufort, North Carolina. One was a faculty position at University of Southern Louisiana, and one was a faculty position at College of Charleston. University of Southern Louisiana was a no-go with my girlfriend and wife, so that one was off. College of Charleston was very attractive because Charleston was a very nice place to be. And it was a faculty position that was a 10-year track. So it had a lot more stability than postdoc at Beaufort. But we were young, and the work at Beaufort was more exciting than College of Charleston job. A lot of people College of Charleston, Beaufort job, research. So looking at those two, I also think when you're young, that's my perspective, you take more risk following. So the Beaufort postdoc was the way to go for that first choice. Second choice, I was at Beaufort, North Carolina. There were some changes in leadership. The new director called me and said, "John, you're great. There's just one thing you can't work on today." Well, I know what that means. It means I'm not going to be here any longer. So start looking for, next option, right? I now need to generate options for myself. So I had, one option was Oregon State University, and the other option was Hare. Oregon State University was a 3-month salary, 9-month SAW, which basically means, I don't know how much you all know about academic positions, but many academic positions, you get paid 9 months, and then you need to find your funding for 3 summer months. And that's grant work. But some universities have different structures. So University of Oregon, the position that I applied for was 3 months funded, 9 months SAW. They'll have to go out and find 9 months salary. There are research organizations in this country that are 12 months SAW. So you got to do a lot of grant writing at 12 months off and be willing to tolerate a lot of risk. So at that point in our life, we had a son who was a couple of years old. Do we move to Oregon for 3 months salary, or do we move to no American for 12 months? That one was, I had 2 options. We were the only one. And then the moving to the director position, I wasn't looking to leave my current position. I could still be an American in the position I was in at the time. I still would love doing that. But I really wanted to sort of try something else. The environment in Northeast Fisheries Science Center had changed, and I wanted to make it a more positive environment for science to happen. Like I said, slide. So it was more of a choice to make that change, not I wasn't looking to change, but I chose to change. That's the sort of transition. Yeah. But everyone has these different transitions. Generate options for yourself. Trade off.
Thanks for being willing to be sharing, open and honest. Other questions?
Thanks a lot for the talk and taking the time to answer all these questions, John. I wanted to circle back to one on the final slide that you gave in mind of the Osprey. So that ultimately involved Fiona's question. If I remember correctly, others were kind of sprung out of the kind of tragedy of commons thinking fisheries. A example of tragedy of the commons. But Eleanor got into that's big solution. Curious if you think this question about are there some specific examples here in the East region where community government pushing Russia out and foods different.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you very much. And her work and others Heather Leslie, who's at the University of Maine, this idea of community governance. When we think of community governance, we think of smaller scale. But you could step back and look at the New England Fisheries Management Council as quote unquote community governance, but the community is huge, right? The community is Connecticut to Maine. So, but that is participatory government. Then you sort of step down, okay, where are there examples of community governance, sort of community more along the lines of what we would call community? And there aren't as many, certainly in federal fisheries, but in the state fisheries, there are a number of examples. The river herring runs, manages state, and the Maine in particular is an area of community. The river herring is complicated, but some states have moratoriums that can't fish river herring, some states don't. Maine is a state that doesn't have a moratorium. Each town sort of controls its own run, how much commercial harvest can be taken. They sort of work collectively through an informal river herring cooperative. I'm not sure I'm getting it wrong, but then they sort of think about how many river herring. Okay, so river herring is one example. There is some work again in Maine with soft clams. I'm not that familiar with it. The state of Maine, DMR, was working on the problem to try to get sort of the beds to think about collectively how many soft could we take out of it. So there are some examples. I'm not as versed in that, but I have very much from a federal perspective. I think that level of community is a much more effective way. The regional fisheries management councils are participatory. The scale is too large to really think about it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I agree with your title. Incremental is necessary to solve bigger problems. But could you give us a specific example of how that works, where it works?
And again, I think every cycle of well, not every fisheries management will work. There are fisheries where that incremental approach, that cycle data collection, stock assessment, management advice has resulted in a rebuild fisheries. A good example is black sea bass and Atlantic. Scotland fisheries are now 300% their target. I think that really has come from this incremental science. Thinking about going to another part of the NOAA Fisheries mission, what I call North Atlantic right whale successful. I think that one is very much perspective dependent. 2017, 2018, the population was in a free fall. Agency put in some measures which were not popular. The agency was preparing to put in additional measures which were even less popular. The Appropriations Act, the agency was stopped from doing the new measures, but the sort of give time to see what happens. And the population is slowly gaining ground again, and then working with the on-demand incrementally to sort of using on-demand where areas are closed to still allow access, and then trying to take advantage of this sort of slow recovery population that could be turned. Those would be the two examples of about. I mean, it's like when I saw this paper, your question and your question were the reviewers' two biggest comments. One reviewer said, "This is all known. This, don't even publish this paper because it has no value because Eleanor did this on it." Yes, and it is known in the scientific literature, but I can tell you in sort of New England fisheries where I am working, these ideas are not talked about, so there is value against the editor of that. And then your question with one of the reviewers was like, there's no more time to be incremental. We need to be revolutionary. We need to make major change now to solve our problem. It's like, if you look back at revolutions in the past and how many times have revolutions solved the problem with that? Scientifically, maybe. culturally and historically less so. So an incremental approach, building coalitions, working on a problem, from my perspective, is a much more persistent and durable outcome. I think revolutions are, interesting to talk about, but they can be very dangerous in terms of what the problem, we don't know what the outcome is. So those are the two, those are the two things the reviewers were like, no, don't publish this paper. So I convinced the editor, no, this is worthwhile. Thank you.
So I think we should thank John for a very thought-provoking seminar this evening. I think it's going to take a lot for us to really be thinking through how those 10 lessons are going to be impacting the things that we're doing and what we're doing. For now 11, exactly, although I do want credit for some of this, yes. Next week, we will be welcoming Ashley Bolsecco, who is from the University of New Hampshire. She will be presenting Microscopic but Mighty, the Microbes That Drive Coastal Ecosystem Function. 8 o'clock, same place, same time. And thank you everyone for being such a great attentive audience. Thanks again, John. We really
Thank you very much
appreciate
for having me.